To understand him and his appeal is to understand where he came from. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the seventh of 8 children, didn't learn to read until he was 10. The boy who was once forced to drop out of school to work, shining shoes and selling peanuts, became Brazil's president in 2002, known now affectionately as Lula. His unlikely ascent was made all the more remarkable by those he brought with him. Millions of Brazil's poorest rose to the ranks of the middle class during his tenure.
Eu quero estar abraçado, lado a lado com o povo brasileiro para fazer as reformas que nós precisamos fazer neste país.
The party he co-founded 2 decades earlier as a union leader, the aptly named Workers' Party, was the first major socialist party in Brazil's history. It would go on to dominate politics for the next 14 years. Until, of course, it all came crashing down. For 3 years, Brazil's political establishment has been overrun by a series of corruption scandals. The largest by far was a pay-to-play scheme involving the state-owned oil company, Petrobras. The Workers' Party was dragged into the middle of it with allegations it funneled bribes to pay off politicians and buy their votes. The Petrobras scandal has acted as a match to the flame in which virtually every corner of Brazil's political landscape has been exposed for corruption. Lula's successor, Dilma Rousseff, was impeached last year in a separate graft probe, ending the Workers' Party's run on power. The man who replaced her, and who helped orchestrate her removal from power, Michel Temer, narrowly escaped a corruption trial last month when the lower house voted to spare him until his term expires at the end of next year. And now Lula himself is facing a near 10-year prison sentence if a court upholds his corruption conviction.
Se alguém pensa que com essa sentença me tiraram do jogo, podem saber que eu estou no jogo. Pode ser.
Nosso candidato é Lula, é o plano A, B e C. Nós não temos outro candidato. Avaliamos que uma eleição sem Lula é fraude.
Lula has announced his intention to run in next year's presidential election. And despite his conviction, it's clear he is still loved by many of those who supported him from the beginning. At 71 years old, he just finished a 3-week tour spanning 3,000 kilometers to whip up support. But with a lengthy prison term looming, Lula's fate could determine the political future of the Workers' Party. And in a context of endemic corruption, the only place he and his party may find retribution is at the ballot box. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now in the studio is Consul General of Brazil in Istanbul and former Ambassador Paulo Roberto França. From Recife, Anthony Pereira, Director of the King's Brazil Institute. And in Belo Horizonte, Márcio Coimbra. He's a political coordinator for the Federal Senate of Brazil. Gentlemen, lots to talk about. Really looking forward to this discussion. I thank you all for joining us. Paulo França, the Attorney General filing those charges against the big guns in the Workers' Party. A criminal organization, this is what they're being called. Does that sound accurate or ludicrous to you?
I think that the level of corruption and fraud that has been unveiled in Brazil is unprecedented. Never in the history, not only in Brazil, but in a democratic society, such a level of corruption has been discovered, has been unveiled. So I think that what has been done through the work of Lava Jato car wash is that a number of documents, a number of testimonies, a number of elements, emails, bank transfers, have been put together to uncover this criminal organization. Corruption has been endemic. It has grown to a level, as I said, unprecedented. And of course, it's in the interest of Brazilians that all this be investigated, and of course, those that participated in criminal acts be punished.
Hundreds of millions of dollars involved here. Anthony Pereira, we're talking about $500 million in bribes in several public entities, corruption, money laundering, cartel activity. Is the Workers' Party corrupt?
I think it's good to contextualize it, though. As the Consul General was saying, corruption has been going on for a long time in Brazil. The corruption of the Workers' Party involved a coalition of parties, so not just it. And it's fairly traditional in a sense. It's sort of kickbacks for contracts and for illegal campaign financing. And I think what the Consul General said is very important. The scale of the money diverted that's been revealed by the car wash investigation is really staggering. And it's money that could have been used for education, for health, for infrastructure. So that's why I think it's such a serious issue. And in my view, car wash itself is not necessarily capable of changing the incentive structures in Brazil so that politicians and company executives are no longer corrupt. I think there does need to be complementary political reform.
I tend to hear, whenever I cover the story, from those who support Lula or Dilma, is they say, well, that might be true, but everybody's corrupt. They're all corrupt, including Temer. Now, is that a cop-out, or is there some truth to it that the entire political institution is a corrupt one?
Your question is really good, because what happens in Brazil is that our political system looks broken because the corruption scandals, they begin with the PT, with the Workers' Party, but it goes along with other parties, reaching the PMDB, who is running the country right now, the PP, and some other parties. Even the opposition is involved. So our entire political system needs a reform. Now in Congress, we're discussing a reform in the political system, political finance for the campaigns, barriers that could exterminate some parties that we have, like more than 28 parties that are with seats in the National Congress of Brazil and the House of Representatives. So we need to make a deep reform on Brazil institutions in order to finish with the corruption scandals in Brazil. We began some years ago with the PT, with a state called state capitalism, where our government would put money on private companies to generate some champions of our economy. And that went really wrong because it began a large scale of corruption in our institutions, in our biggest companies.
Let me ask you, Paulo França, is it helpful that Lula is on the campaign trail now? He's just completed his 3 weeks in the Northeast, called it the Caravan of Hope Tour, as we heard in the report as well. People love him. He was a great president for many millions of Brazilians, or tens of millions of Brazilians. People love him. He might go to jail for 10 years, but that doesn't matter to a lot of people who absolutely love him. Is it helpful that he's on the campaign trail?
I think that this is a political move, in my view, because, of course, he needs to remain alive, and he needs to shake up a little bit the situation in order to put the Workers' Party in this trend towards 2018. Many people say and speculate that, in fact, the Workers' Party is preparing someone else to present itself as a candidate, to be presented as a candidate. The problem with Lula is that even though he is a very charismatic, very important leader, nowadays he has a rate of rejection which is very high as well. Many people say that, in fact, what is happening with him is that he has like a ceiling in terms of approval. And he would not overcome the ceiling because the rate of rejection is very high.
Is Lula's ceiling the same as the Workers' Party's ceiling, Paulo?
It's around the same, but I think Lula, as I said, as a charismatic leader, goes a little bit beyond the Workers' Party. But as I said as well, nowadays he has been linked with all these crimes that have been done in Brazil. Yeah. And the scale of corruption that has been unveiled by Car Wash.
Yeah, when he was convicted in July, I spoke to a member of his defense team, lawyer Valeska Martins. In July, here's what she had to say to me. Have a listen.
This is an innocent man, and as an innocent man, he deserves to run. The people of Brazil are the only ones who may judge him. Democracy is the only rule that may be applied now in Brazil. But we cannot accept
Judge Sergio Moro did judge him. You're appealing, but he did judge him.
Keep on attacking the rule of law.
No, he did judge him. He's a guilty man. He's appealing it.
Well, he's not a guilty man. Moto found him guilty, and this is something that we foresaw in July of last year when we filed an appeal before the Human Rights Committee of the UN. They are following the script, and I even feel sorry for Judge Moto that he had to convict Lula on such a weak basis. It will be revised in history, and it will be revised internationally. It is a shame, and it is a shame on the rule of law for Brazil.
Anthony Pereira, when she told me they are following the script, what do you think she means?
Well, I think there's a part of the Brazilian electorate that believes that the judgment of Sergio Moro was more political than legal. I haven't read the judgment. I'm not a legal expert, so I can't comment on that particular aspect of the case. But I think there is a part of the electorate, especially those people sympathetic to the Workers' Party, who believe that there's something of a double standard here. I think, as you were saying in the interview, he will appeal. The judgment will probably take place in Porto Alegre before the registration of presidential candidates. So we're likely to know about Lula's eligibility to run before the presidential election next year, and that might force the Workers' Party into a post-Lula future. And I think that's one of the things that the party is dealing with. How do they transition to a post-Lula future? Do they make broad alliances as they have in the past? Do they open up the party so that it's not run exclusively by people from Sao Paulo? I mean, one of the things that was really different about Lula's second term, as opposed to his first term, is that he lost a lot of middle-class support between the 2002 and 2006 election. So if you look at who voted for him in 2006, it was far more the poor and the less educated. And that created a polarization in the electorate that really hasn't changed. That was continued in 2010, 2014 elections. So that's another issue facing the Workers' Party. Does it try to build a broader base of support for itself, or does it remain exclusively representing that lower end of the socioeconomic ladder? And that's difficult for it because it means that a lot of the opinion makers, middle-class opinion makers, the media, are against it.
Yeah, all great points. I mean, it's clear that the Workers' Party, because of all of this, is on the ropes. Marcio Coimbra, they're on the ropes, they're defensive, they're in trouble. Now, here are some of the strategies that they've been using. They've been talking about Moro being on a witch hunt. Now they're talking about Rodrigo Jano, the prosecutor. He's also on some sort of legal witch hunt. In a statement last month, they said, quote, "In the country of the coup, the big decisions are made in Washington and Wall Street, and the order given is to sell and loot Brazil." Marcio, this is clearly a strategy, right? They believe everybody's out to get them. The prosecutors and the judges are bought, and that Washington and Wall Street are pulling the strings. Is this going to resonate with a portion of the electorate who will believe that and see truth in that?
I don't believe so. I believe that Lula's image it doesn't look very good to the electorate right now. People do not have anger against Lula, but they do not believe him. So I think they use this strategy of saying what is happening, that it's a hunt for the PT. But, you know, we can see a lot of other people, former members and members of the PT, who have been caught and are in jail, that are talking. Their finance minister, Antonio Palocci, last week gave a huge deposition to Judge Moro, unveiling everything that is behind the scenes, saying that Lula had an account with Odebrecht with more than $300 million. And this is a lot of money. We're talking about a lot of money. And Odebrecht is not the only company. There is more. Senator Delcídio do Amaral from PT, who also went to jail, also have given strong proof against them. And they say that everybody who is caught and everybody who talks, now it's on the other side, is playing Judge Moro game. That's not true. These people were caught and they're trying to cut deals and are delivering everything that is behind the scenes, all the corruption scandals, all the money laundering, all the dirty money that is behind their campaign and their government.
Paulo, let me ask you a personal question.
Yeah.
As somebody who represents your country, it's a great country. You're representing it here as a consul general. You're a former ambassador. You're a diplomat. As Operation Car Wash sort of unfolded and the details started coming out, the millions of dollars, the tens of millions of dollars, the people involved, did you find it more and more embarrassing in trying to still represent this image of your country to the world while all of these sordid details were coming out?
Yes, well, I said yes as an immediate reaction because, of course, it's difficult and it's painful. But at the same time, I think I have to be very proud of Brazil because what's happening in Brazil is something that as well is unprecedented. Car wash is doing a job that no other country has done in history. We have in Brazil nowadays, because of corruption, ex-ministers. Marcos Coimbra just mentioned, Antonio Palocci was one of the most important men in the Workers' Party. He was Minister of Economy. He was Chief of Staff of Dilma Rousseff. You have the Speaker of the House, who is in jail and does not belong to the Workers' Party. And then car wash cannot be accused of being rigged.
Right.
You know, you have some of the most important businessmen, such as Marcelo Odebrecht and other ones. So I think that this is something really unprecedented, very important, and which is establishing, I think, a new step forward for Brazil. I think we needed that in order to strengthen our democracy, to strengthen the rule of law, because all these lawsuits, all this investigation is happening with due process. People has had enough possibilities to defend themselves.
Right.
So I think it is a very important example. And internally in Brazil, we needed that. As I said before, it's painful, it's difficult, but at the same time, it's something that if you look forward, it's very positive. Let me just mention a sentence that I like very much. John Fitzgerald Kennedy said once that a crisis, the word crisis in Chinese, is made of two characters. The first character represents danger. The second character represents opportunity. So I think that's what's happening during this very difficult crisis. We have a huge, important, and positive opportunity to moving forward, strengthening our democracy, strengthening rule of law, and beginning to work in terms of politics with new standards of ethics, of rules of the game. I think this is a very important element forward for the future.
Right. Democracy is messy business. But when powerful people are held to account, I guess you can say democracy is working. Interesting times in Brazil. Going to be interesting to see what happens with Lula on the campaign trail and what happens when the High Court decides on his future. And we'll be watching the future of the Workers' Party very closely as well. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Paulo Roberto França, Anthony Pereira, and Marcio Coimbra. I thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.